Thank you, Fernando. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. I see some known people from PVPS, from Thailand, Morocco, Sweden, Denmark, Italy, Spain, France, and more. And of course, everyone. And I'm going to talk today, and I will be followed by that by my colleague Izumi Kaizuka about the development of PV markets. And she will focus more on the industry part. Most of the findings here are coming from the Trends in PV Application report, which has been published in December. It's a report which is published now for more than 25 years by the International Energy Agency Photovoltaic Power System Program, and which describes the situation of the PV market, technology, industry, but also the impact on the society of PV development. Of course, in 2 times 20 minutes, we can only scratch the surface of what's happening in the PV sector. So what we are going to try to do here, it's as every year, and I really thank you, Fernando and Leonardo Energy, for organizing these webinars. We'll try to give you a glimpse of what's happening in that very dynamic sector. So as mentioned, I'm the operating agent of the task 1 of the IEA PVPS program, which is the task devoted to study markets, industry, policies, and more. And my company is Becquerel Institute, a consulting company focusing on PV, established in Belgium, but active globally. I will not say too much about the PVPS program. You can find all the information necessary on the website, just knowing that it was established in 1993, that it counts members on all continents, and it's a research program, which basically researches a certain number of key aspects of PV development, including sustainability, reliability, grid integration, some specific applications like BIPV or VIPV, but also solar resources, off-grid and edge-of-the-grid applications, and of course, as I mentioned, market and industry research. And just to start, it's interesting to have finally the numbers. It takes more and more time every year due to the number of countries where PV is developing, but also due to I would say the difficulty of collecting data in a certain number of countries where official reporting is not as good as what we can imagine in other countries. So we had at the end of 2019, and I will talk about 2020 later, we had a bit more than 620 gigawatt of PV installed. This starts to include decommissioning of PV plants, which is happening at a very low level, but in a certain number of countries, and repowering, which is basically something which is happening in the wind sector, in the wind industry for years, but not yet in the PV industry massively, which basically consists in simply changing some components of a PV system to extend its lifetime. As you can see, it's quite obvious, the bulk of the PV capacity is installed in the Asia-Pacific region, which is logical when we see the percentage of population, of global population, which is living in this part of the globe, followed by Europe, which used to start PV development quite early and then experienced a major slowdown during years. We see that the market is developing rapidly in the Americas, and we start to see it in the Middle East and in Africa. What does that mean in terms of numbers? And here we can see the last 9 years for which we have complete statistics, so until the end of 2019. In 2019, more than 111 gigawatts were installed in the world. After 2 years, in 2017 and 2018, above 100 gigawatts, the market grew again. And what is interesting, and I will come back on that after, is that basically the market grew on all continents. The growth could have been even more important, and I will come back on that, with at least a stable market in China. But in any case, it's quite an achievement to see the market above 100 gigawatts for 3 years in a row. You might have seen from IRENA, for instance, number below 100 gigawatts. It's because we don't use the same metric. We use DC power, while IRENA, for instance, is using AC numbers. AC means simply that we see lower numbers because we don't take the nominal power of the PV modules, but what is injected into the grid. It's a decision that we have taken a long time ago in IEA PVPS. It's to consider DC numbers because this allows to calculate much better the energy produced, but also to have an idea of what is really installed. If we look, and I'm coming back to that on the historical evolution, it's quite obvious that Europe started PV development. I will not spend too much time on that now, but what we see more and more is that we have many new markets which appeared on the map and which are contributing to PV development. And it's especially true in Asia, with China, of course, Japan, of course, but also Thailand, Australia, Korea. And another one that appeared on the map last year, and but I mean 2019, and also in 2020, which is Vietnam. And without any doubt, Asia is now the core of the PV market. It's followed by Europe, the Americas, which are roughly at the same level, Oceania, which includes Australia, and Africa, where development is, at least for the time being, slower, but it starts to develop quite well in a certain number of cases. This is already known, but I would like to just to repeat it. At the end of 2019, we had 30 gigawatts installed in 2019 in China. The second region in terms of installation, and I like to put European Union countries together because basically they rely very often on the same set of energy regulations. It's with 16 gigawatts, so the European Union was number 2, followed by the US with 13.3, and so on and so on. I will not go to the ends like that. What is quite interesting is when we are looking at the development, we can see that basically we have major achievements on all continents. What is even more interesting is during years, we had a limited number of PV markets which were contributing significantly to PV development, which meant that in case of policy change in one of these markets, the market could be impacted significantly. This is still the case, but it has significantly decreased. We can see in 2019, for instance, that the top 5 markets represented still 57% and the top 10, 75% of the global PV market. But we are far from the numbers that we could have seen a few years ago when more than 80% of the market was concentrated sometimes in only 5 PV markets. This is the sign also that the market is globalizing, and that's even if we have still a certain number of large market leaders, we start to have other countries and more than 10, 15, which are installing, more than 15, which are installing at least 1 gigawatt a year. This is what I was mentioning before, with 111.6 gigawatt installed in 2019. The market could have been higher than that. And basically, when we look at the decline of the market in China, which went down to 30 gigawatts in 2019, basically, we still had a major growth of the market in 2019. And this growth could have been even more impressive if the Chinese PV market would have stayed around 44 gigawatts as it was in 2018. So we should interpret the results of the 2019 year as a year of major market development because of that. And I will give you some glimpse of what happened in 2020 at the end. But what it means is that basically that the dynamism of the PV market before the pandemic was quite impressive, with, as we have seen very often, major developments every 2 or 3 years. And this is again what happened in 2019. We saw a major development with growth in almost all regions. Now, what are we installing? Because it's interesting to discuss about the PV market in general, but we have several different PV markets. And something which is quite interesting is that if you look at what happened from, let's say, 2015 to 2018, is that a very large part of the growth was concentrated in grid-connected centralized application, what we are calling in general utility scale or ground-mounted applications. It's logical because this is the market segment which is the easier to develop. But what we have seen from 2017 is major developments also of distributed PV applications. And at the end, if we look at the result in 2019, we can see that basically 60% of the market, something like that, is about grid-connected centralized applications, so utility-scale ground-mounted plants. But we also have a significant part of the market which is about distributed PV applications. And this is something quite positive, because this market segment requires more policies and more, I would say, political commitments to develop. And this is what we start to see globally after years of growth powered almost only by centralized PV applications. Some market niches are starting to be visible, like floating PV. Others are less visible yet, so we haven't included them in this figure. BIPV, or even simplified BIPV. VIPV, which is, I would say, completely different, but uses PV cells. Agricultural PV, PV for infrastructure, and basically everything else which is a little bit outside of the mainstream type of installations, so either distributed PV system on roofs or centralized ground-mounted systems, is developing fast, but still at a niche level. I have little doubt that these segments will start to contribute much more in the coming years, but it must be seen as an emerging part of the market, which is still not negligible, but at least extremely small compared to the two mainstream parts of the market. Some additional sub-segmentation can be done, of course. In the buildings, we should split between residential, commercial, and industrial, with totally different behaviors depending on the place on the globe where you are. So, for instance, in Europe, residential electricity prices are much higher than commercial ones, which are higher than industrial ones. But this is not the case everywhere. We have plenty of countries where residential electricity prices are subsidized and where they are cheaper than commercial and industrial prices. So when we're looking at the competitiveness of PV, it's very important to look at local specifics, and especially whether the market is liberalized or not, whether the grid costs, for instance, have to be paid in terms of self-consumption, and so on and so on. If we're looking at the drivers, basically what is driving these two main parts of the markets, distributed and centralized, what is interesting is that basically we start to see a major divergence between these two parts of the markets. We also start to see, and I will have no time to come back on that today, but it's an interesting discussion. Also, the components starts to be different. And I have little doubt that soon we will definitively see PV panels which are conceived for utility scale applications only, or for distributed applications on roofs only. And of course, we see that also in the incentives which used to be massively still 5 years ago feed-in tariffs for distributed and centralized applications now are starting to diverge. And this is logical. We'll not spend too much time on that, but we see more and more tenders driving the utility scale markets. We also see merchant PV developing at a low level, so which is called here non-incentivized PV. It represents 2% of the market, but in some countries, it's definitively growing fast. And for distributed applications, we still have trading of green certificates, which is more important in some countries than others. But non-incentivized self-consumption, which already represents 10% of the distributed PV market, and which, in my opinion, is going to grow significantly in the coming years. Incentivized self-consumption or net metering or net billing represents also 1/3 of these applications, but this is something that will have to be carefully studied in the coming years, since what we have seen in countries where they're taking more importance is that they will have to evolve towards non-incentivized self-consumption. So, what are the key aspects of distributed PV and centralized PV? If we are looking at distributed PV, you have seen numbers, more than 40 gigawatts installed in 2019. The key evolution of the key trend is about less financial incentives, but more regulations. So self-consumption is also evolving, and we will publish soon an updated version of the self-consumption policies report, which has been published for the first time in 2016. So wait for that in the coming weeks and months. But basically, we see that self-consumption is becoming more complex. When it was local, it's becoming collective. So basically split between different tenants of the same building, or split between different buildings in the same area, but also delocalized or virtual. So basically consumption and production, which might be separated either in different buildings or even in different locations. I'm not going to speak too much about that today, but this, together with the concept of energy communities, is going to significantly impact the PV market, the distributed PV market. In the coming years, there is a need for advanced regulations. It's complicated. It requires to change many existing electricity regulations, including the way our grid costs are calculated. And what we already see in a certain number of countries, it's really punishment taxes and punishment through grid costs, which have the aim of really putting the brakes at the development of distributed PV. It's definitively, and this is a bit strong, but there is a fear from incumbent players that self-consumption of and distributed PV could really dig into the business base of a certain number of existing utilities. And that's the reason why we see these punishment taxes and grid costs. Of course, PV should integrate itself into the electricity system, should be treated in a fair way, and will not be able to develop massively with financial incentives. So we have to look at these incentives, these regulations, how grid cost and tax are paid, and look at how the complete system will evolve in the coming years to define the best regulations. This is quite a challenge. This is something extremely complex and important, with a totally different management needed depending on the country, depending on the stakeholders, depending on the niche. On the segment. We could discuss about BIPV, small agro PV. These are distributed PV applications, but they remain niche for the time being. If we're looking at centralized PV, more than 70 gigawatts installed in 2019, what we see, and I will come back on that in a minute, it's super competitive tenders with numbers which are even below the real cost of producing PV electricity. But it's a segment which is easy to develop. We don't need many regulations. This is something which can be set up by a government in a couple of weeks or even months. So that's the reason why it's developing so fast. We see more and more storage requirements, not everywhere, but this is something either for storing electricity for the evening or the night, or simply to smooth grid integration. We also see that merchant PV is there, and that the business models which are associated are starting to change. Merchant PV means I'm just selling my electricity on the electricity market without relying on any kind of financial incentive. One key question in the coming years, it's when will PV be competitive enough to produce green hydrogen at a price competitive with normal hydrogen? This is something which is going to happen thanks to PV. Of course, not in all countries, but we can imagine that in North Africa, in the Middle East, in some places of Latin America, or Australia, this could become a reality soon. And of course, centralized PV is also about large agricultural PV or large floating PV system, including offshore PV. I would like now to spend just a few seconds on showing you how the PV markets, all the price are spread along the PV markets. Out of 111 gigawatts installed in 2019, we can see that 78 gigawatts were representing PV installation with a system cost below $1 per watt peak, and 34 gigawatts, which is not negligible, above $1 per watt peak. In the, I would say, the last 10 gigawatts, so the most expensive, we have, of course, off-grid, edge of the grid, we have BIPV systems, we have some countries where simply transport costs are tremendous. If you have to develop a PV system in some places in the center of Africa, for instance, you need planes to bring the PV system there. It doesn't cost $1 per watt peak. It costs much more depending on the location and transport costs. What is quite interesting is to see that also distributed PV systems, and especially on industrial roofs, can be extremely competitive. And of course, for the most competitive PV systems, we have prices now which are close, system price close to $0.5 per watt. This is, of course, in the most competitive ones, and it depends on the ability of module manufacturers to continue providing PV module at the cheapest cost, and my colleague Izumi will tell something about that later. I'm giving you that short update about the most competitive tenders and about something interesting which is happening, at least in Europe. But before talking about Europe, we had, and I took the example of a tender in Qatar, which was concluded by a price at $0.0157 per kilowatt hour, something extremely low. If you have just a simple LCOE model, you see that this could be achieved with capex at 0.5 euro, or this is something doable, with an extremely low cost of capital, which means extremely low cost of debt and low equity. It's something doable in theory. It's extremely competitive, so it means we can produce in some places in the world PV electricity below $0.02 per kilowatt hour. It is terribly competitive. It's something which is really a game changer. But we cannot do that for the time being in all places in the world. And so if you try to do the same thing in Portugal, and that's the second one, with the same characteristics, you will hardly go below 2.5 euro cents or $3 per watt. So how that happened, that some tenders have been won with a price which is around 0.0112 euro per kilowatt hour. And that's where it starts to be interesting. It's, in my opinion, it's companies which are buying a grid connection for future development and which are going to sell a part of the production on the market. And it means that if some companies are starting to do that, it means that for the future, there are many, many expectations of the possibility to do profits by selling electricity, either directly to companies through PPAs or to the market. And in that case, it's super important to secure grid connections when you can, even if you're losing money in the beginning, because 1.1 euro cents per kilowatt hour, which is a little bit more than 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour, you cannot achieve that with the current production cost in Portugal. I will finish by giving you 2-3 tips about what PV means in the world. Penetration of PV is a bit higher than 3% of the global electricity demand. Of course, we have countries where that level is significantly higher. You will tell me 3% is not that much. Yes, but it's evolving fast. And if we look at the speed at which the PV market is developing for the time being, we might soon add 1% a year. This is something which will be a real game changer in the coming years. Of course, the countries that started to install PV massively before the other ones are, of course, higher in the rankings. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but in terms of installed capacity, we can discuss about what it really means. From all renewables, PV and wind are basically trusting the major part. We still have a little bit of biomass, hydro, and the other ones, but basically PV and wind are definitively the 2 key renewable energy sources. But if we compare to what remains to be done, decarbonized electricity sources represent still something around 1/4 of the production of electricity in the world in 2019. So there is still much to do. In terms of economic added value, I would say PV represents in a certain number of countries already a significant share of the GDP. So we are below 1%, but this is not negligible. And given what might come in the coming years, we can imagine that PV will become a key electricity source. And I will finish with these ones by saying we represent 3% of the electricity demand in the world, which means less than 1% of the energy demand. But PV has avoided 720 millions of tons of CO2 equivalent in 2019 in the world. This represents 1.8% of all energy-related CO2 equivalent emissions, so which is more than the share of PV. And The more PV is installed in countries with, I would say, a bad electricity mix, the more PV contributes positively to reducing CO2 emissions. Soon, in 2-3 years from now, PV will avoid more than 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions per year out of 45. There is still a large job ahead, but basically we start to count also on that part of the equation. And I will finish rapidly by that. We might have thought that COVID might slow down, and it slowed down in some countries, the PV market, but preliminary numbers, which we have compiled with Izumi Kaizuka and our colleagues from PV Market Alliance, are showing that we might have installed, and these are really preliminary numbers, 140 gigawatts in 2020. I will not go through much into the detail, but it means compared to 111 point something, that again, the market grew. And we'll see later on with the snapshot report at the end of March or beginning of April, which actually happens. But if COVID didn't succeed in stopping the growth of PV, I don't know what will. So the question for 2021, so this year in 2022, where will we go? 150, 200 gigawatts more? What is absolutely sure is that the cost competitiveness of PV is now so important that it can develop in so many places that basically we will see market development in any case. It might be more complicated in some countries because there is a need for local manufacturing to compensate for the jobs that the energy transition is going to kill in, I would say, the standard energy industry. But basically the odds are quite positive. And if we look at the PV market itself, more and more it's going to touch other energy sectors, transport, building, industry. I spoke about green hydrogen, and so on and so on. So it will become more complex, more integrated, and this is something that we'll have to deal with in the coming years. And I will finish by that. It's a real tool to fight climate change, as you have seen. We're approaching 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions avoided every year thanks to PV. We'll be there relatively fast, but there is still much more to do in order to completely decarbonize the electricity and the energy mix, because this is the fate of PV. It's not only to dig into the electricity mix, but also in the energy mix in general. And it will require many changes in political frameworks in the coming years with a real vision, which is something which is always complicated. The report is available on the website, and I'm done for now. And I would like to give the floor to my colleague Izumi. You can ask questions in the Q&R, and I will, we will, Izumi and myself, answer after her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaëtan. So you can now stop sharing, and Izumi will take next. Thank you. Izumi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fernando. Now I share the screen. Okay, and start the slideshow. Okay. Okay, so now I'm joining from my home in Tokyo. But now Tokyo is under the state of emergency, and we have the soft lockdown, and all the shops, restaurants need to shut down close at 8 o'clock in the night, and the staying at home is recommended in Tokyo. I hope things return to normal as soon as possible. And in this presentation, I will talk on the industry trends from the trends report. But now it's the beginning of the 2021, so I'd like to add some of the updated information of the PV industry. Some of the slides come from my company, RTS Corporation in Tokyo, that we have the more than 36 years experience and worked for PV industry. And here is my topic here. First, I'd like to show some of the highlights from the PV industry from Trends report. Then I will talk about the recent topics in the upstream sector and downstream sector. And then I give some impact of the COVID-19 and opportunities in the future. So the first slide, I'd like to start the supply and demand. This chart shows the PV installation capacity. Red bar shows the production of the PV modules. Then the green bar shows the manufacturing capacity of the PV modules. And in 2019, we analyzed new capacity as shown as 111.6 gigawatt, as Gaëtan said. And the PV module production was around 124 gigawatt. And we have the sufficient manufacturing capacity for that demand. Because around 225 gigawatt of the manufacturing capacity we had in 2019. But about manufacturing capacity, I need to note that this figure is total sum of the reported numbers from PVPS member countries or industry associations, and some of the manufacturing capacity is somehow not used or outdated equipment. But the most reported data didn't report the such numbers. So the real figure, I assume real figure is 10 to 15% less than these figures. The next slide shows the share of the manufacturing countries along the value chain from the polysilicon, wafer, cell, and PV modules. And as well as the previous year, 2018, China dominates the value chain. And of course, China is the #1 country in terms of the consumption of the PV module, also the supply. And in case of polysilicon, China accounts 60% of the production share. In case of wafer, the 96% of the wafer was made in China. And in case of the cell, China's share is 76%. And in case of the PV module production, China has the 71% of the share. Because of the trade conflict or other factors, the module production site is now more and more diversified. So as for the 2020 data, we need to wait, but the overall situation has not changed drastically in last year, because most of the capacity addition, capacity enhancement occurred in China. I will show some figures with next slide. This slide shows the capacity expansion of the PV modules by major companies in 2020. If I add the increase of the capacity announced last year, the more than 50 gigawatt of the production capacity occurred in China. And other data of the 2020 is not ready, but if I picked up PVM's number, the installed capacity could be reached 140 gigawatt, and the production of the PV module could reach 150 to 160 gigawatt. Yesterday, Chinese PV industry, CPA, they announced the 125 gigawatt of the PV modules produced in China last year. If I add the other countries' numbers, such as Malaysia, South Korea, or Taiwan, or Vietnam, and USA, it could be reached 150 to 160 gigawatt. And the manufacturing capacity, now we are checking, it also could reach more than 250 gigawatt. And I'd like to show our recent study of the top 10 PV module suppliers in 2020. This is only the preliminary data, so that it might be changed. What I want to say is that 2019, if you want to be the top 5 PV module supplier, you need to produce 8.4 gigawatt. But in 2020, if your company want to be the top 5 player, you need to produce more than 10 gigawatt of the PV modules. And the number 1 player, LONGi, produced more than 20 gigawatt of the PV modules. And I think I can say this year as well, share of the top companies will increase if we consider their production enhancement plans. Now, I'd like to talk about the recent price trends of the PV modules. Last year, while first half of the year, we observed the price down of the PV modules, mainly affected by the COVID-19 impacts. In July, the explosions occurred in 2 polysilicon plants in Xinjiang, China. Then another poly plant halted operation due to flood. And these incidents resulted in temporary shortage of the poly and price increase of the polysilicon observed. Then the increase of the wafer cell price, and lastly, the PV modules price raised. And somehow the polysilicon price stabilized, but still the higher range. So at now the price of the polysilicon in January, I saw the increase of the price. In this year, I assume the significant drop of the PV module price will not occur because the additional production capacity of the polysilicon will not start operation until 2022. And also, at now, the glass shortage affected the PV module price. This is a website I picked from the Bloomberg News. It was in November, the Bloomberg News reported the shortage of the glass for PV modules. And this slide is a little bit busy, but I'd like to talk more about the glass demand and supply. Currently, the module size are getting larger and larger, and also the module size diversified with the different size of the wafers. And also the bifacial modules needs 2 sheets of the glass. So the short supply of the glass is reported. And in July 2020, the reported price of the glass for PV module 3.72 US dollars per square meters. In November, it raised to 45, 6.97 US dollar per square meters. Then price has been stabilized. And at that time, Chinese government banned production enhancement for glass companies concerning the excess production capacity. Then November 2020, the 6 PV module supplier requested the ease of the production capacity enhancement for PV modules. And the ministry in charge of the industry agreed that. So now we can expect the new capacity addition of the glass, but it takes some time. For example, the Kibin Group, they decided to invest to new capacity, but started operation in 2022. And some companies are planning to convert their own facility to the plant for the PV glasses, but it takes time. So the situation is now improving, but still the glass price is higher than before. This is the reason that I assume that this year that we will not see the significant decline of the PV module price. And next, I'd like to talk about the new technologies. This is also the busy chart, but we summarize the adoption of the new technologies along the value chain. But I do not have enough time to talk each one today, and would like to focus on the larger wafer and higher output PV modules. From the end of 2019, the higher output PV modules are more than 500 watt PV modules are announced by some companies. And last year, I couldn't go to the SNEC SNEC, but to the land, lots of the company announced the high efficiency or high output PV modules using larger wafers. And these higher output modules are expected to contribute to LCOE reduction. But I had some logistic issues due to the larger size, the handling or logistic has issues, and sometimes EPC complains. But in reality, as of 2020, the share of the large size have remained small. So the real commercialization starting this year And the next slide shows the very interesting the outlook. This slide is from the Chinese PV Industry Association. Some of the text are still in Chinese, but I put some English translation here. And you can see that in 2020, the share of the large-sized PV wafer 182 or 210 wafer, the total share is less than 10%. But very interestingly, the Chinese PV Industry Association expect the large-sized wafer 210 or 182 wafers in total, their share will be 50%. And also the Chinese industry thinks the higher output module rapidly introduced in the market. And as a result, the small-sized wafer, conventional wafer share will be less than 5%, and 160 to 166 wafers, the share will be less than 50%. But as I said, we saw the shortage of the glasses. So I'm not sure how the large-sized wafers can be commercialized or adapted in the downstream sectors. And among major PV module manufacturers, there is discussion of the standardization of the wafer size. This figure my colleague made. At now, we have the two schools. One group supporting the 210 wafer, and one group supports the 182 wafers. And of course, this 210 groups support the larger wafer because of the better opportunity for the LCOE reduction. But this group, 7 companies are supporting the 182 millimeter wafers for the production and logistic aspects. And always after the presentation, someone asked me which will be the winner in the future. But my answer is it remains to be seen. But anyway, the wafer industry is dominated by China, and also the oligopoly we are observing, and we will see which will be the standard in the very near future if we follow the Chinese industry outlook. So here I'd like to summarize some upstream sector impact on the LCOE. First of all, the scale of the economy contributed lower price of the PV modules, and also the gaps of the demand and supply and competition among the companies contributed to the lower price. And the higher efficiency or higher output will drive the LCOE reduction on system levels, and larger wafer contributed But the temporal supply shortage of materials, the polysilicon, I said the cover glass, but also the EVA shortage was reported recently. These supply chain issues affect the prices. And also the other factors, we have the issues of the trade conflicts or the current economic situation in specific countries, the exchange rate fluctuation that affected PV module prices. But I hope these issues are temporary one, and toward the terawatt era, the sufficient PV module supply will be realized in the future. Now I'd like to go to the downstream trends, and time, I do not have enough time, but I'd like to give some keywords. The inverter sectors, now the evolution of the DC-AC ratio contribute to the higher capacity factor. And the share of the Chinese inverter is now increasing around 60% in the global, but regional difference observed. And the inverter manufacturers, we saw consolidation. The products aspect, it is very interesting. The string inverter, adoption of the string inverter for large scale is increasing, and new technologies are also adopted. But and also the storage integrated inverters are commercialized. But with the increase of the variable renewable energy, the requirement for grid code or regulation are implemented. This could be the increase of the inverter price, but now the many companies support the concept of the grid supporting inverters. And here I'd like to show the some figures. As I said, China has a 60% share of the inverters in the global supply, and the price is contributed to the lower LCOE. But we saw the regional differences because of the grid code or other reasons. And now in utility scale, for example, in US, more than 70% of the utility scale projects deploy trackers, and the trackers expect to reduce the LCOE as well. And last year, the successful IPO reported from the 2 tracker companies, and bifacial PV modules plus trackers are expected to lower the LCOE further. Now, because of the time, I need to go to the my last slide. We saw the impact of the COVID in the to the economy, but so far the PV market was not so heavily affected. And fortunately, in the various countries, the deploy of the PV procedure or policies are announced in Green Deal policies. So I think that this will contribute to the future this year and next year's PV market. And the uptake of the distributed PV plus storage, this segment is growing for sustainability or BCP. And the O&M sector, the remote diagnostic technology highlighted. And also this pandemic with this pandemic, the diversification of the production sites are considered in many places. And we still have the many opportunities, and the Gaëtan explained the floating PV and agro PV, and these two sectors are expected to grow further. And in specific market, repairing or revamping business started. And I expect the PV for specific application, the value-added product will be developed and disseminated with, for example, tightening building code or the growth of the EV. But these segment, the joint development of the product producers essential. And solar becomes the new king of the electricity. This is the World Energy Outlook IEA's famous report said. So the future is PV is, I believe, true, but the industry need to overcome several issues. Thank you for your attention. Lastly, I'd like to thank to NEDO supporting the PVPS activities. Thank you.